aperture to a lot of photographers has a direct connection to a price tag. And that is because the wider the aperture is on a lens, the bigger damage it's going to cause to your bank account. But the bigger question is, does that have a direct connection to the artistic outcome of the work being produced? So today I just want to take this opportunity to break down the artistic role aperture takes in the act of creating a still or moving image. What are some of the questions that you have to think about and decide when to open up or close down on an aperture? What are some of the artistic principles that are triggered by using this function? Thanks for tuning in, everyone. If you're new here, my name is Gabriel Leung, and I'm on a mission to empower all levels of image makers to grow artistically by drawing the connections between visual language and photography while sharing practical advices through my professional practice and also through teaching the medium as well. So as a relatively new YouTuber like myself and just learning along the way, there's something that I've been really neglecting on and just way overdue was to do some shout outs from friends within our community. So just want to take this little opportunity today to do a little bit of that. First person was feedback from Paul Abalu. He said that I just want to let you know that I'm rewatching all your videos. The way you explain things and talk about art and design at its roots has bettered my photography. Thanks, man. This is really, really important, and this is just part of the goal for starting this whole YouTube channel, was to make content that you can revisit. And so thanks for confirming that for me. Another person is Hamza Jonas, who actually has contacted me through DM on Instagram and asked me to comment on some of his work. And this guy is just super proactive, learning and improving his work. I've been just following his Instagram, and he's really improving through utilizing his newly acquired knowledge and actually doing so on actual projects. So really well done, and thanks for opening up for conversation, being criticized on some of your work, and hopefully I will continue to help you along the way. These two people has amazing work on Instagram, so I'll stick the handles down in the description. Check them out, and also understand that we all start somewhere. It all depends on where you want to take it as you learn and grow and develop. That also motivates me to create more content, so please keep your comments coming. Anyway, I'm super excited about today's topic, so let's jump right into it. For the question today, is bigger always better? So I just want to get through this real quick, but if you want to jump ahead, feel free to do so. So in short, aperture is the size of the hole that controls the amount of light that reaches the sensor. The f-stop mathematically is a fraction number, so the larger the number, the smaller the hole. So imagine there's a faucet and a bucket that you have to fill with water. You turn the water on and it passes through the faucet. The larger the hole, the quicker the bucket is going to fill up. The smaller the hole, the longer it's going to take for the water to fill up the bucket. Now imagine if you fill the water all the way to the top of the bucket is like a correct exposure. If you have less water, it's almost like an underexposed image. If you have the water spill over and outside of the bucket, that's an overexposed image. So aperture really just controls the amount of light and how quick you can fulfill the need of the sensor or film to create a correct exposure. But there is another aspect of aperture as a byproduct when you actually open up or close down the size of the hole, and that is depth of field. So depth of field is something that we want to focus on talking about today. And when you open up your aperture, the larger the hole, the shallower the depth of field, which means the less area is going to be in focus. In terms of area, we're not talking about within the two-dimensional plane, but the three-dimensional plane is the z-axis or the z-axis. So the less planes is going to be in focus. The smaller the aperture, you will have a broader depth of field. The more planes is going to be in focus, probably from the nearest to the furthest. This is the basic understanding of how depth of field works. When you have a really large aperture that open up all the way to 1.2 or 1.4, 1.8. And the rest of the background is this kind of blurred effect, which a lot of people talk about saying is a bokeh effect. In the root of it is from a Japanese term bokeh or bokeh-aji. This creates a kind of soft, desirable look for a lot of photographers and people in the visual community at large. Here, I want to share 3+1 tip on how to approach this function artistically. Tip number 1, isolation. Using a larger aperture or a wide open aperture, let's say 1.2, 1.4, 1.8, your subject becomes the only thing that is in focus, or even only parts of your subject is in focus. And that really creates a tendency for the viewer to understand that this is where I want to look at. This isolation concept can be easily understood when you look at the direction of photography within the film, especially for film that has a lot of dialogue. When the camera really focuses on one person talking, their facial expression, the face almost fills the entire or half of the frame. And you can just really see the small expressions, the changes on the face, the muscles, the blink of an eye really tells a story that not just the dialogue, but how they feel about what they say adds into the story as well. As our brain naturally reads into anything that's presented to us, we try to understand what we don't understand. We analyze and interpret things. The area that's blurred basically shuts that reasoning part of our brain off. It basically tells us to look at what we could understand, what is legible and what is approachable. So by isolating a subject and making it the only thing that is in focus, it helps to funnel the viewer's attention and comprehensive energy investing into that one main subject. It also helps to shorten the time to recognize what is being presented, what should be looked at before moving on to the next thing, which is super crucial for today's fast-paced visual cultural world. Tip number 2, abstraction. Reality is real, it's precise, it's sharp. Everything lacks abstraction. Therefore, whenever something is rendered abstract, it gives off the impression that it is more artistic. For centuries, painters have been trying to paint their subject as real as possible until the invention of photography. This prompted them to question creating a painting in the first place. Hence the emergence of Impressionism, but vice versa. For a photographer working with a medium that's so precise has the difficult dilemma to create a photograph and calling it art. By rendering a larger portion of the frame blurred and abstract, it helps to strengthen the artistic aura of a scene by reducing the precision nature of the camera as a machine of reproducing reality. Now notice how I phrased that. A blurry image isn't entitled to be called art, but it does give off a more artistic impression right off the bat. Tip number 3, the overall frame. So what about using a smaller aperture when you close down all the way to f11, 16, 22, when the image is sharp almost all the way through? By creating an image that has more areas that is in focus, it prompts the viewer to have more things to look at and requires them more time, more comprehensive energy to really understand the information, the detail, the connection between them, starting to analyze and interpret what's presented in front of them. Also prompt them to think deeper, really find and draw out the intention of the photographer, because everything seems equally important. With equal importance, this way of presentation actually creates a more objective way of presenting a work, that no particular main subject stands out. Take the landscape photo for example. There are many details to look at, so you will jump from one point of interest to the next. Step back, take in the whole image, and seeing the whole landscape. You will slowly find out maybe the whole image is the message of the photographer to really convey a particular feeling, to create an atmosphere that hopefully the person looking at the image may resonate. Just have a few more tips to go, but if you're finding this video helpful, don't forget to hit like, consider subscribing, and hit the bell notification so you won't miss any future videos that comes out. Here's a +1 tip. all in-betweens. What about the in-between apertures between the smallest and the largest? They might get a little neglected because they are there just for getting a correct exposure, right? We're talking about like f4, 5.6, 9, 10, 11. What about them? When do we use that? Well, when we talk about this really depends on the lighting situation and the distance between you and your subject, the focal length that you're using. But if you're focusing on your subject, let's say a portrait of mainly of the face and the neck, maybe the upper torso. When you have a very shallow depth of field, just their eyelashes and nose are in focus, but their pupil are slightly soft. That creates a slightly weird portrait. So it really depends on what you're shooting. Situations like that, you might want to close down your aperture just a little bit more. Let's say using f2.8, so you actually have the whole face in focus because it is a portrait. The purpose of a portrait is to see the person and their expression, the connection between the camera and the subject, right? Think about what you're shooting and how you're shooting, the distance, obviously create a correct exposure, but what aperture and what depth of field you are trying to use as best solution and the best vehicle to convey your message. So here's the take-home tip, and that is the aperture priority. For a lot of single lens reflex cameras, mirrorless cameras, they have different functions. They have the fully automatic manual mode, but also there's the shutter priority and the aperture priority. What these does is very similar to a automatic mode, but you only control one setting, and that is the aperture. So you can set your aperture to a larger aperture or a smaller one, but everything else just kind of works automatically. You also have to set your ISO, your film speed, because that really changes a lot of things. But other than that, the camera really decides on the shutter speed that you require to get a correct exposure. So what that means is you don't have to care about getting a correct exposure. You just want to have to focus on what you're shooting, what needs to be in focus, and the depth of field that you want creatively. For many situations, especially outdoor, the only automatic mode that I sometimes use is the aperture priority. And that is because I don't have to care about getting a correct exposure. That kind of technical side has been taken care of by the camera. All I have to focus is to choose the right aperture for the creative output that I want to create. Sometimes a bit of automatic functions on the camera goes a long way. So a quick recap on the 3 tips on using the function of aperture are isolation, abstraction, and overall frame. Okay, so here's the challenge for you. First of all, take a photo walk and shoot all your photos with the largest aperture you have on your camera. Take another walk using the smallest aperture on your camera, all photos. And the third part, take one subject, for example, a still life, and shoot with the full range of apertures you have on your lens. Now these all may sound super beginner's exercise, but here's the good part. Take a good look at them and see how you feel differently when looking at different shots when the aperture varies. It really changes the whole atmosphere of the scene or the subject depending on what aperture you're using and what depth of field is being created. So how did you find this episode? What is your favorite go-to aperture? Let me know down in the comments below. Essentially, a simple way to understand aperture is that it simply shares your way of looking at the world, and through that your message comes through. This brings up another important aspect of photography, and that is perspective. This video I talk about finding your own perspective as an image maker. So go check it out and I'll see you over there.